I'm Pauline. Standing here in the cemetery, watching the man who was supposed to be dead kneel in front of his own grave, my world shatters. It's as if a dam has burst, and all the memories, hopes, and fears I've kept buried for years come rushing out. This man, whose voice, the angle of his jaw, and every movement are so painfully familiar, says he doesn't remember his name. But when I see the small, distinct birthmark on his collarbone, the same one I traced countless times in our past, I know it's him, Ethan Sullivan. Our story began long ago. I grew up in a series of foster homes. My childhood was a patchwork of temporary places, where nothing truly belonged to me, and attachments were always a risk. By the time I reached adulthood, I learned that stability was something I had to fight for, not something that was given. I took whatever jobs I could find, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves in the early morning. Eventually, I landed a job at a small diner in downtown Chicago. The pay was meager, and the hours were long, but it gave me a sense of independence. That's where I met Ethan. He was different from the other customers. He didn't draw attention to himself. He would sit quietly, order the same coffee every time, and always thank me by name. At first, I barely noticed him, but he noticed me. He saw how I listened to the customers, how I never rushed them, even during the busiest hours. As time passed, our brief exchanges turned into longer conversations. He asked about my day, and I asked about his work. He was discreet about his background, but I later found out that he came from a wealthy and prominent family in the area. I was taken aback, not because of his wealth, but because of the gap it created between us. However, Ethan didn't seem to care about that gap. He openly admired my honesty, my resilience, and the way I carried myself without bitterness. I slowly started to trust him, and our relationship grew through small, consistent moments, shared meals after late shifts, quiet walks by the lake, and conversations that stretched late into the night. When Ethan told his parents about me, everything changed. His mother, Victoria Sullivan, was a cold and calculating woman. She made her disapproval clear without raising her voice. She would ask polite but judgmental questions about my education, my family, and my future plans. His father, Henry Sullivan, was quieter but equally distant. Their words were filled with concern for Ethan's reputation and the expectations of their family. Ethan was caught between two worlds. He loved me for who I was, but he had been raised to respect his parents' authority. Sometimes, he would withdraw into himself after visiting them, his mood shifting without explanation. I understood his pressure, even if I didn't fully understand its source. When Ethan admitted that his parents opposed our relationship, I didn't argue. I believed that time could soften their hearts. I trusted Ethan when he said that his parents would come around once they got to know me. But then, one fateful night, Ethan stopped answering my calls. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it was just exhaustion or another argument with his parents. But as hours turned into days, my worry grew. It was a mutual acquaintance who finally told me the news: an accident on the highway, a car engulfed in flames. Ethan was dead. I was in shock. I waited for his parents to call, but they never did. When I finally summoned the courage to call Victoria, she was merciless. She accused me of distracting Ethan, of filling his head with unrealistic dreams. She made me feel like I was the cause of his death. The funeral was a nightmare. I attended alone, wearing a simple black dress. I stood at the back, feeling the weight of everyone's judgmental looks. No one offered me condolences. I felt invisible and exposed at the same time. At the graveside, as the casket was lowered into the ground, I collapsed. I was taken to the hospital, where I received another shock: I was pregnant. In that moment, my world changed again. I was alone, grieving, and now responsible for a new life. Victoria found out about the pregnancy. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, demanding that I terminate it. She placed an envelope full of money on the table, implying that I should take the money and disappear. I refused. I knew that this child was not a mistake. It was a part of Ethan, and I was determined to raise him. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Pregnancy took a toll on my body, already worn out by grief. I worked as long as I could, taking on small jobs whenever possible. Friends were scarce, and support was limited. There were many nights when I lay awake, worrying about how I would manage alone. But when my son, Oliver, was born, everything changed. Holding him in my arms, I felt a sense of purpose. I named him Oliver, a name that spoke of new beginnings and survival. After Oliver's birth, I tried to return to work. But the service jobs I found were harsh. The hours were unpredictable, the pay was inconsistent, and the customers were often rude. I was constantly exhausted, and I worried about Oliver's safety and well-being. Then, I found a job at the cemetery. It was an unexpected turn. Ethan was buried there, and at first, the irony was not lost on me. But the job offered a steady pace, flexible hours, and a quiet environment. I accepted it, and it became my refuge. I worked alongside an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson had worked at the cemetery for decades. He was kind and gentle, and he treated me like a daughter. His wife, Mrs. Thompson, was equally warm. She would bring me leftover food and a knitted hat for Oliver. They created a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. Every morning, before starting my work, I would visit Ethan's grave. I would stand there quietly, straightening the headstone and thinking of him. It was a ritual that grounded me. One day, I noticed something strange. There were cheap flowers and a bag of candy at Ethan's grave. At first, I thought it was his parents, but these offerings were different. They were simple and homemade. The pattern repeated, and I started to become more attentive. I mentioned it to Mr. Thompson, and he said they were recent and not from the Sullivans. Other co-workers noticed a man lingering around the cemetery at night. The idea of a homeless man leaving these offerings unsettled me, but it also made me curious. I decided to find out who was behind it. I swapped shifts with a co-worker and arrived at the cemetery before dawn. I waited near Ethan's grave, my heart pounding with resolve. And then, I saw him, the man who looked like a homeless person but was Ethan. When he spoke those words, "I'm sorry, I didn't forget," it was as if a part of me that had been dead for years came back to life. After that moment, we sat on a bench and I showed him old photos of us. As he looked at the pictures, fragments of his memory started to return. He remembered an argument, a blow to the head, and then waking up alone and confused. The truth was cruel. The car accident had happened, but it wasn't Ethan in the car. Someone else had taken his vehicle and died in the fire. The family, eager for closure, had accepted the wrong conclusion without question. Ethan was alive, but our lives had moved on. I told him about the funeral, the hospital, and about Oliver. When he learned that he had a son, he was overwhelmed. He cried, and I comforted him. Ethan needed time to come to terms with the truth. When he finally decided to face his parents, it was a tense meeting. In the living room, Victoria was stunned when she saw him. She tried to come up with excuses, but Ethan was calm and firm. He exposed the truth about how they had treated me, how they had tried to silence the pregnancy. He made it clear that he would not allow them to rewrite the past. He demanded accountability and honesty. Henry finally admitted that they had wanted closure and had been afraid of the complications I represented. Ethan told them that forgiveness would be conditional. He would live independently and build a life based on responsibility. After that, news spread quickly. The man presumed dead had returned, and the woman who had been dismissed had endured. There was no grand celebration, but a sense of justice had been restored. Ethan and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. We talked about the years that had been lost, the misunderstandings, and the people we had become. Oliver was cautious at first, but over time, he started to trust Ethan. I left the cemetery because I no longer needed to hide in silence. Ethan offered me a stable job in his business, but only after we established clear boundaries. I didn't want to lose my independence. The cemetery still holds a special place in our hearts. I still visit Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They were the ones who stood by me during my darkest days. Their kindness and support taught me that family is not defined by blood but by those who stay and care. Ethan's parents remained at a distance, but with respect. There were no grand reconciliations, just a new understanding. I no longer seek their approval. I've learned that survival is my strength, and love is proven by responsibility. And truth, though it may take years, will always return to reveal what remains: dignity.